In this module, I'm going to talk to you about the basic SQL syntax. So the basic syntax for executing commands against a database is known as a SQL statement. And a SQL statement, again, is just an expression that tells the database what you want it to do. It's going to take that expression, it's going to parse it into its component parts, and then it's going to execute that expression, assuming, of course, that your expression is a valid SQL expression. So let's see a SQL expression being built. First, here's select, first underscore name, from, person. And what's really important is to have a semicolon at the end of your command, right? Every valid SQL expression has a semicolon at the end. Now let's look at these different pieces of this expression and sort of parse it the way that a database would. So select. Select is what's known as a keyword. In fact, it's a particular kind of a keyword called a command. In this course, and I think as a good practice, I'm going to have all the SQL keywords in uppercase and all of the identifiers, like first name, in lowercase. From is also a keyword, and person is also an identifier, right? So select and from are the keywords, first name and person are the identifiers. Select and from are part of the SQL specification. First name and person refer to things inside of my database. Now, we can break this down in other ways as well. Select first name is what we refer to as a select clause. So every SQL statement can be broken down into individual tokens, like keywords and identifiers, and also individual clauses. And so we can look at it in either way. In this case, the select clause tells the database what it is that we want. The from clause tells the database from where do we want the data that is expressed in the select clause. So the select clause and the from clause go together to say, give me the column first name from the table named person. All of our SQL statements can be broken down in this way, even the more complex ones. In the more complex ones, we also may have multiple clauses, right? We're not limited to necessarily to 2 clauses and 2 keywords and 2 identifiers. Again, this is just an example. I'm going to cover 4 basic SQL commands in this course. The first command is the select command. The select command is a command that allows you to get data. It allows you to retrieve data, 1 or more rows, from 1 or more tables. If we have a select statement like this, where we say select first name, comma, last name from contacts, we know that select is the command, it's a keyword, from is a keyword, first name, last name, and contacts are identifiers. So we take this statement to say, please give us the first name and last name column from the table name contacts. And this is what the result set would look like. Now let's talk about the insert command. The insert command adds 1 or more rows into a table. Insert only works against a single table, unlike select, which can work against multiple tables. So let's assume that we have the table as we described it on the last slide. We've got the contacts table where there's an ID column, a first name, and a last name. An insert statement might look something like this. Insert into is the actual command. We do refer to it as insert as shorthand. Then we specify the table name and the columns that we want to update. The columns go inside of the parentheses. And then we specify a values clause. In the values clause, we specify the values that we want to be put into the table. In this case, we're saying Fritz and Onion, first name, last name. And so this would be the table after we executed this command. Now you may notice that I didn't specify the ID column, but the ID column updated automatically. This is what's known as an auto-incrementing column, and it's very common in database design. We don't want our identifiers for each row to be something that is associated data with the person, right? We don't, even in this case where we have people, maybe we even know their social security number, which should be a unique number for each person. We don't want that to be the primary key. We want some basically generated or, unrelated auto-generated value for the primary key. And that doesn't have to be specified when you do an insert statement. Update is our next statement. Update modifies one or more rows in a table. So let's imagine that I have this table where there is a row with the first name of John and the last name of Flanders. If I run this update statement, update contacts, so I'm telling the database I want to update the contacts table. I want to set the value of the last name column to be equal to Ahern. Then I have a where clause. The where clause tells the update statement, what is the restriction on this update? If I didn't specify any where clause with this update statement, that means that every single row in my contacts table would have its last name value set to Ahern. In this case, that would be a bad thing. It is not always the case, however, that a update statement without a where clause is a bad thing. Sometimes it's a very useful thing if you need to update all of the data in one or more columns inside of a table. But it's not very usual. It's much more usual to have a where clause where you're restricting that data. Once I execute that update statement, I'll have a row in that table where the first name is John, the last name is Ahern, and notice the ID stayed the same, right? We're updating that particular row. We're not creating a whole new row. And the last of the basic SQL commands is delete. So delete is there to remove one or more rows from one table. So let's imagine here is my table contacts again. I've got my first name and last name and the auto incrementing ID. What I can do is say delete from contacts. And so again, the delete from is the full real delete command. Contacts is the table that I want to delete rows from. And where ID equals 2 is my where clause or my restriction. Again, just like update, if I say delete from contacts and don't specify any where clause, that's going to delete all the rows in my table. And generally speaking, that's not what you want. So having a where clause in this case, again, is almost always going to be the case. And so that's going to restrict the delete to just those rows that match the expression in the where clause. And in this case, that's going to be where the ID is 2. And that's going to get rid of the row with Fritz in it. I'm going to go into these commands in more detail in later modules. So again, this is just a short introduction to the idea of what's in a SQL statement and what are the basic SQL statements and commands that we're going to cover in this course. Now, in terms of this course, I'm going to be using the database called MySQL. I'm using it because it's free, it's open source, and it supports ANSI SQL. So ANSI SQL is what I'm covering in this course. If in the end you actually end up working on an Oracle database or a SQL Server database, you may see some different SQL, some vendor-specific SQL extensions. For this course, again, I'm sticking with the very basics that should work in any database. I'm going to put SQL keywords in uppercase. That will help to keep the SQL statement easy to read, so I can see which parts are SQL and which parts are going to be provided by me. That is, which parts are going to be identifiers. Table names will be singular. So I'm going to have a person table. I'm going to have a phone number table, not a phone numbers table or a persons table. Now, this is a database design decision. People have differing viewpoints on this particular point of design. My college database instructor said the name of the table should be about what each row is about. So each row in a person table is about a person. If, on the other hand, each row in a particular table was really referring to multiple things, multiple entities, which is not very usual, but does happen sometimes, then in this particular kind of database design, having a pluralized table name would be okay. But just to be clear, I'm going to use singular table names throughout the rest of this course. I'm never going to repeat column names inside of a database. So most column names will be prefixed by the name of the table, like person underscore first name or person underscore last name. And that is just another piece of database design that I follow. Hopefully it will make the expressions and the statements clearer to read. And you may or may not follow that. If you go forward and create a bunch of databases, you may find databases where that particular restriction that I am implementing isn't going to be found. That's okay, right? People who design databases have different viewpoints on database design. I'm just specifying up front, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And so you should see that be consistent throughout the rest of the course. So understanding the basics of SQL, the point of it is to be able to ask questions, right? We have data and we have questions that we would like to know about that data. And so using SQL properly will help us to be able to answer those questions.